And welcome to another chapter of God, doesn't this idiot know when to quit? Better known as Ben's music career. Almost made it a whole year without doing another episode. But anyway, today's episode marks the big change. It marks my move out of the bedroom and away from the old cassette 4-tracker and into working with other people and going into the studio for the first time. It's a comedy or tragedy of epic proportions. Actually, I'm still not too sure myself. This is kind of where I learned that it can be a real fine line between comedy and tragedy. But with that, today let's take a look at my first properly released album, Pressed and Everything. Greetings from Elderbush Gulch. I graduated from high school at the end of May of 2004, and I was exhausted. Over the course of my senior year, I'd watched my high school romance burn out, watched Ben and Brendan collapse, been drafted into, and soon went AWOL from the school quote-unquote jazz band, worked an internship, worked my first so-called real job, and wrote and recorded West of Elderbush Gulch, which I opted to not release. I knew I was going to be starting college in about 3 months. I knew I would eventually want to start on another album, but really had no immediate plans. So, whereas a sane kid would have done something constructive, I spent that summer reading a lot of mostly non-fiction books from the local library, and listening to whatever new, to me, music I could get my hands on. Then, almost abruptly, it was time for school.
Campus, part of lower downtown. And the 21st century brought another significant new beginning.
I started at the University of Colorado at Denver, henceforth UCD, in late August of 2004 as a music industry studies student, which was a mishmash of performance, production, and business classes, and of which you could pick an emphasis. Not wanting to look like a complete loser to my parents, I opted to go with the business emphasis, even if it was the least of my interests. Anyway, I managed to unwittingly step into a near-perfect storm of far more experienced and accomplished musicians, songwriters, and so-called serious composers, a few of which would soon achieve varying levels of fame. Among them were 2 members of The Fray, the How to Save a Life group, one of whom damn near became my bass player. Also, Esme Patterson, at least 2 members of Mies, who were briefly signed to Atlantic, and Gustavo Input d'Arthenay. Among the crowd outside of school were Devachka, Nate, or Nathaniel Rateliff, Tickle Me Elmo, or Tickle Me Pink, and 303. As you could well imagine, this was a tad intimidating. But I knew I wanted to get in on this whole music thing, so I assessed the situation, and I came to the following conclusions. 1, UCD, and really the Denver music scene in general, was loaded with folky singer-songwriter types. This was certainly nothing new to me, so I decided to focus my energies on being a good little singer-songwriter. 2, I'd been on stage a few times by this point, but never as the center of attention, so I started doing the whole coffee house open mic thing to try and develop some kind of stage presence. And 3, if I was going to join the elite group of rising stars, I needed some kind of product to sell. I knew West of Elderbush Gulch wasn't going to cut it, so I needed to start work on a new project. Read another album. On a somewhat contradictory note, I should note here that during the first semester of school, I briefly came to the conclusion that maybe I should try and get Ben and Brendan back together. That way there'd be two songwriters to reckon with, one of whom was better looking and had a better singing voice than yours truly. In December of '04, I tried one last time to get the old duo back together. He wasn't interested. So, in one fell swoop, just before Christmas of 2004, I found myself facing the reality that if I had any future at all in music, it was as a solo artist. Up until this point, I'd been a 100% hermetic lo-fi creature of the cassette, which was not a cool thing to be at the time. But honestly, I was pretty sick of it. I was tired of the technical limitations. I was tired of trying to work around my parents. I was tired of trying to fake my way through instruments I didn't normally play, like the drums. I was tired of not having real drums on my recordings. I'd never had any bass at all due to track limitations. Bottom line, I wanted to get into a real studio and I wanted some hired guns on hand. So I spent most of 2005 working odd jobs, selling off parts of my collections and some of my gear, and just all around squirreling money away. Oh yeah, and writing songs. Lots and lots of songs. By around September, I was starting to try and wrangle together a bassist and drummer to back me on the album. I would still handle guitars and keyboards. I was also starting to look around for project studios to work at. So around October or maybe early November, I thought I had everything together. Then everyone flaked out on me, and the studio went belly up. I probably should have taken it as a sign. Of course, slightly demented kid that I was, all it did was piss me off into redoubling my efforts. Having said that, after this, things go a bit hazy to me. But I believe around New Year's I got everything worked out. I'd pinned down a bassist and two drummers in case one flaked out. Now, I do remember this much. The bassist also had a rehearsal space and a Yamaha 16-track digital workstation, so we could record as we went along, saving me some major studio costs in the process. The basic tracks were to be worked on for 2 days, ostensibly one for rehearsal and one for recording. The sessions were to begin on Friday, January 27th, 2006. The recording of Greetings was easily my worst experience as a recording artist. I'll try not to blab too long about this. Yeah, famous last words. Anyway, under circumstances that I was never privy to, the aforementioned bassist, I think, rented out the basement of the now long defunct Rock and Rose Art Gallery in downtown Longmont, Colorado. In this claustrophobic, acoustically deficient basement was an ancient drum kit, the aforementioned Yamaha workstation, a stolen grocery store cart full of old rock LPs, but alas, no turntable, and lots of dog hair all over the place. Anyway, I thought I had it all planned out. I even saved a little extra so I could stay in a hotel a few minutes away from the gallery, so I wouldn't have to make the 75-minute commute to and from beautiful downtown Aurora. That first day, the bassist and I rehearsed a bit, and that was it. Both potential drummers were MIA. The next day, our drummers were both no-shows again. I wound up shelling out for another night at the hotel, just in case things could get going again that night. On Sunday, we finally got our first drummer in, who refused to rehearse. We just had to roll tape and hope for the best. Now, I had 9 songs I wanted to have my rhythm section on. We got through 5 before the drummer's gout made it too painful to play anymore. Yeah, my musicians were a little older than me. Thankfully, the second drummer was finally available, so we brought him in, and I actually liked him a good bit better, but he was a slow learner compared to the first. We barely got through 2 more songs. As a last-ditch effort, the bassist wound up jumping behind the kit for 1 more song. I probably could have done a better job, and I had yet to sit behind a full kit, ever. Song number 9 was immediately reconceived as an acoustic number I could do during the, as yet unscheduled, overdub sessions. Once the basic tracking sessions ended, all I needed were the multi-tracks to take back with me. The CD burner in the workstation seemed to be working ultra slow, which actually turned out to be the perfect storm of cheap, crappy CDs and operator error. Regardless, I agreed I'd return in a day or 2 or 3 to pick up the discs. A week or 2 later, after never getting a hold of the bassist, I returned to Longmont to at least confront him about it. No luck. After a total of 5 weeks and a lot of nagging, I finally got a set of CDs from the bassist, which, shock of shocks, wouldn't read. About a week later, a mutual engineer acquaintance who happened to periodically hang out in that basement went to bat for me. As related to me soon after, he borrowed, without asking, the workstation, harvested my tracks, loosely organized them, burned them to CD, and mailed them to me. I'm taking it on faith that he, returned the workstation. Anyway, once he got involved, what had taken the bassist 5 weeks to do wrong took the acquaintance about 5 days to do right, and mail to me, and hold in my hands. To this day, I'm convinced that if not for him, I would have never seen the multi-tracks from that session. Despite the efforts to at least organize the multi-tracks, they were still in absolute shambles. Some tracks were out of sync, some clipped like crazy, others had hardly any level at all, and on at least one occasion, the bass track, which was recorded direct in, was just a wash of low-pitched feedback. The performances were less than stellar. Given the lack of rehearsal, my guitar was leading the charge throughout, instead of the drummer. I played the simplest, most obvious rhythms I could just to keep everyone in line. It didn't really work. Despite this, I figured that with a little cleanup and a truckload of overdubs, the project would be salvageable. The nearest open block of days at my project studio of choice was still a couple of weeks out, but I took the first block of days I could get. I wanted the album done so bad that I didn't care what those days were, and I just stopped going to school for a few days once I could get in. Anyway, it was this little $20 an hour joint in lower downtown Denver, aka Lodo, called imaginatively Studio Lodo, just as that part of Lodo was starting to really get gentrified. I booked 4 days to do about 24 overdubs, record 2 songs from scratch, and mix the record. No sweat. Studio Lodo was this odd 2-story open loft with a small recording booth on the lower level and a small bedroom on the upper level where the proprietor lived. He was this enigmatic young audio engineer named Jerome, who looked like the archetypical LL Bean male model. He fell off the face of the planet before the album came out. Anyway, Jerome was a decent, if somewhat inexperienced engineer, and he actually wound up singing backup on a couple songs. Aside from a couple of problematic overdubs, the whole process went off more or less according to plan. 2.5 days of overdubs and new recordings, a day and a half of mixing, and a few stolen hours a few days later to polish it a bit. The mastering was done somewhere else down the line. As of April 22nd, 2006, Greetings from Elderbush Gulch was finally finished. I'll discuss it more later, but I was never happy with the original mix or Loudness Wars informed master of this album. I went back and remixed and remastered it in 2011, which came out far closer to my original intent. Unless noted otherwise, all song clips are from the 2011 remix. This was the only Ben and Brendan song I bothered to carry forward with me. At the time of writing, June 2003, it was intended as a statement of purpose. Since the purpose hadn't really changed, it seemed only just to bring it along as the bridge between the bedroom era stuff and my hopeful ascent to the big leagues.
Heard every line from me about 1,000,000 times before. My bags are packed, the car is waiting for me. Bound for glory, said I'm on my way, come hell or high water.
This was the first significant Ben Minot brand cynical rant. I remember I wanted the song to be a dynamic affair, starting with a lonely, quiet acoustic guitar, with a slightly startling band entrance, increasing intensity, a slight tempo increase toward the end, and a rather rude return to just the acoustic for the final chord, which intentionally resolved to not the tonic chord. Of course, there was no place in the basic tracking sessions for such frivolities. At best, I managed about half of what I intended to with this one. Also, this is one of 2 songs from the album that I made a music video for. This one being an affectionate parody of the video for the Replacements' Bastards of Young, minus the unfortunate ending.
I could tell you 1,000 lies, I might take an inch up the wood, try. Well, where's my lady with the night black hair? I know she's gotta be around here somewhere, well. I could tell you 1,000 lies, I might take an inch of it would try. Well, where's my lady with the night black hair? I know she's gotta be around here somewhere, well.
This was actually the first thing I wrote after about a 5-month compositional absence. I wasn't adjusting to college very well. I was actually a lot happier hiding out in my car, just staring at the sky and the trees instead of going to class. One morning before leaving home for class, it had just rained. I looked out the kitchen window, saw a quickly fading rainbow, and that was that. The rainbow fades, doesn't last all day. The song was about those all too fleeting moments in life. In the end, this one musically became kind of a response to my classmates that were writing these rigidly structured songs loaded with pointlessly abstract chord changes. You know, the ones that take 8 extra long fingers to play. The song barely maintains a verse-chorus structure, and took the somewhat jazz-informed approach to adding and playing around with a single extra note in otherwise basic chords.
My mind be deceiving me. Seen a face enough to remember. Ah, but the rainbow fades, doesn't last all day.
Well, it wouldn't be one of my albums without some "please cover my songs. This was one of the ones I came up with after deciding I needed to make that unabashed mainstream singer-songwriter album if I was ever going to get my foot in the door. I don't particularly like this one. It kind of feels like a bunch of 70s singer-songwriterisms thrown into a blender, with unsurprisingly jumbled results.
Well, it won't be long until the daylight fades away on a path with those dreams that we knew we'd never see come true. They fade to blue.
Given my penchant for less than contemporary music and media in general, it shouldn't come as any surprise that I was more eager than most 19, 20-year-olds to listen to my elders. This one was about trying to learn from them while they were still around to listen to. Musically, it's undercooked. Now, I should note that this is the one and only song I completely overhauled when I remixed this album. The tempo is so sloppy, the best I could do was try and process the hell out of the drums, as well as extract and mutilate a copy of the drum track into resembling a primitive drum machine. All for, at least, the illusion of stability.
Sitting there, sweet eyes, childlike. There's something in there that's telling me I know more than you ever will. So take me down with you when you go. 'Cause there's just so many things I still need to know.
And this is where the album's concept starts going off the rails. I'd initially set out to make my big mainstream record, but as it got closer to recording time, the more I'd grown uncomfortable with it. As the writing process wore on, I allowed myself to do some more abstract and jammed out tracks. I also allowed myself to bring back this little gem from the fall of 2004. This one came to me after getting a little too invested in a slasher flick that I was watching, only to come to the conclusion that I probably shouldn't get too attached to the characters in such a type of movie. Musically, it was an odd, nearly structureless, but arguably effective cross between low-key horror movie music and Paul Simon's American Tune. This one was cut in one live take during the OVERDUB sessions.
Well, she's just another scream queen. Now if I could only dream
What I was looking for in the clips is something that I could catch that would distinguish myself from other entries.
Even this album couldn't escape the silent film trap. This was my 2005 entry into the Turner Classic Movies Young Film Composers competition, recorded at home that January. The film du jour was 1923's Souls for Sale, which, if memory serves, is about a woman's rise in show business. The provided scene involved a circus tent burning down. Yeah, the title becomes a teeny bit less cryptic now, doesn't it? For what it's worth, I, once again, didn't make it past the first round. Now, this one wasn't initially intended for the album, but as I was assembling the final project, given that this was where side 2, if it were an LP or cassette, would have started, it seemed like a good interlude, and an even better segue into the following song. Also, I've long since lost the film clip that this synced to, and unfortunately I don't think I could remember the exact point in the film if my life depended on it. This was the last song written for the album. I'd realized that there were no real rockers on the album, so I quickly cooked up this little deadpan parody of all those "I'm a badass outlaw" type songs.
You got something that belongs to me. Those are words I said. I took the money and put a bullet in his head. When fugitive on the run, fugitive ain't got no place to run.
This is the album's second and final "Please Cover My Song" and this is also the best of them. So the idea here was to write a country ballad, which could be fairly easily covered by most flavors of country singers. Of course, not exactly having a country voice, I decided to up the rock quotient a bit and make it an all-around slicker track than anything else on the record. In the end, I wound up with kind of a vaguely psychedelic country rock thing. Oh yeah, and I really wanted a pedal steel guitar on this one, but of course didn't own one, never played one, and knew nobody that had ever so much as touched one. I wound up faking it as best as I could on a lap steel with a volume pedal and a ton of reverb. It sounds somewhere halfway between a trumpet and an air raid siren.
He'll do that till the day we die. And sometimes late at night, when that lonesome wind moans, I think about that look in a raspberry eye.
Admittedly, this was the point where I'd gotten so sick of the singer-songwriter thing that I just wanted to take a long guitar solo. This track took less time to write than it did to actually play the damn thing. Of course, the title would imply that, being a Midwestern white boy, I probably wasn't qualified to play the blues, or the blues, and just barely qualified to play the blues.
stop. And I hate this stupid song.
If you would have asked me at the time what this song was about, I would have said I was taking people's egos to task, because that's what I thought it was. Looking back on it, I think I can safely say that it was really about myself, and I just didn't realize it. This is the one song we couldn't get in during the basic tracking session, hence this ultra-lean acoustic arrangement, which was cut very quickly during the overdub sessions.
Don't you know there's somebody else out there waiting? Just push you out of the spotlight. Well, tell me what you're gonna do about that. Tell me what you see in a life like that. And you're laughing cause you know no other, crying cause someone stole your thunder, and it's just as well, cause everybody's got their own ideas.
When I went back and remixed this album, I decided to take a quick shot at this one, just casually at home. I did this because it was the only song from the album that I'd ever revised. Somewhere down the line, I'd started playing this one at live gigs on a 12-string guitar and at one whole step lower than the original version. This may have been the last time I ever played this one. If not, it was next to last, as I played my unceremonious final show around the same time. The sound quality is poor, but again, I just wanted to get it down on tape, strictly a posterity recording. This one's currently lurking as an album-only bonus track on the Greetings from Elderbush Gulch remix.
But the rainbow fades, doesn't last all day. But if I could just hold the moment, well then these memories I'd surely repay. Yeah.
Alright, I promised I'd get back to this. As I mentioned, I was unhappy with the original mix and master of this album. In 2010, I'd finally taken the plunge and purchased an MBox 2 Pro audio interface, Pro Tools, and a massive bundle of third-party plugins. In April of 2011, the old Greetings from Elderbush Gulch had finally crawled up my ass to the point where I just couldn't stand it anymore. If nothing else, I wanted to root around the multi-tracks myself, which I'd never been able to do, and see if I could improve on what I had. Hell, I'd only built up another 5 years of experience by then. But like a bad joke, as it turned out, the remix couldn't escape the craziness of the original 2006 sessions. The files were in the already archaic Mac-only format SD2. I was still strictly a PC person back then. I wound up having to take the multi-tracks to a Pro Tools guru I'd met on the duck.avid boards, who not only was a Mac user, but still had a period-appropriate copy of Pro Tools on hand. $50 and a public how not to record lecture later, I had shiny new WAV files of all the audio from my little album. The multi-tracks were every bit as bad as they'd been 5 years earlier. I wound up completely stripping down the tracks, resyncing the drums, and going through each and every track, processing each one into its own unique strain of oblivion just so it would all match. It took me about 6 weeks, working on it nearly every day, to reassemble the album. The plugins and overall patching on the remix were, out of necessity, extreme, to the point where I wouldn't wish those multi-tracks on my worst enemy. Nonetheless, I finished the remix and reissued it, download only, 5 years to the day after the original release. It was done with zero fanfare and zero promotion. It was strictly a labor of love. Well, at least one thing was easy about the album. Seeing as I didn't release West of Elderbush Gulch, which already had good existing artwork to go on, I simply replaced the title text on the old West packaging. Since I was already dealing with a mock postcard concept, I decided to adopt the more appropriate title, Greetings from Elderbush Gulch, a parody of Bruce Springsteen's Greetings from Asbury Park. In the end, I sank about $1,100 into the making of this album, which really wasn't that much when you consider that this was for the musicians, the studio time, the pressing, the copyrights, the whole ball of wax. But then again, you get what you pay for, don't you? So, Greetings from Elderbush Gulch was released on August 8th, 2006, and I did everything in my power to promote it, except play live. So, here's what happened. During that gap between the basic tracking session and the overdub sessions, I decided that I'd had enough of the open mic nights and trying to cold call club owners and stuff. Believe me, I played quite a bit in 2005, but yeah, I was just over it. So aside from that, I was able to get the album into a handful of Denver area record stores, and at least one outside of Denver. I actually had this little poster made at the time, and this hung in at least one Denver area record store window, so it got a little publicity, I guess. As far as I know, this is the only surviving copy, my own private copy of it. I also sent copies of the album into all the local publications and a few national indie publications for review. I threw everything I had at it. But unsurprisingly, it was for naught. It got no reviews. I couldn't give away the 100 copies that I'd had pressed. As far as I know, building on that, none of the copies in the record stores ever sold. And the album didn't sell at all until years later after I'd remixed and reissued it and, more importantly, started making Oddity Archive. Now, funnily enough, my main takeaway from this at the time was not so much that I'd made a rough album, although, believe me, I was plenty aware of it, but I felt like I hadn't been true to myself. So, in other words, I felt like I had tried a little too hard to be a good little folky singer-songwriter, and I'd kinda suppressed everything else. So, it was no longer just a component of what I did, but the whole picture. So with that, I decided that I was done being a good little singer-songwriter, and it was just as well because I never got on too well with the folkies anyway. But anyway, that's it for today's archive. Join me next time when I don't conclude my little saga. Yeah, there's only one more chapter to go. So, I think for a while here, as always, I'm going to have to go back to doing, good archive episodes again and try and pull myself back out of the mud, but yeah, I will finish it eventually. I'll talk to you again soon.